to realize what it is like being on the other side, and that it's a case of you're not being rude, not picking up or not answering. And it's not a case of, oh, one time I'm going to pick up because I'm doing something else. It's a case of I'm getting literally 30 or 40 of these a day. If I'm lucky, I can't afford to pick up because I don't want to be rude to someone and say I don't have time to talk to you when, you know, it's something that isn't of immediate interest. So you end up just ignoring the calls because there's too many of them unless you recognize a number in the first place.
Right.
So for that to be solicited and to know what you're doing, and again, it's a whole concept of having a certain amount of time for this and the charitable benefit, that very, very much appeals because it means someone's serious about taking the opportunity. They're probably going to value the time more as well. And for me, you know, that's something, it means I'm giving that time to a charitable kind of cause, and that's beneficial from our CSR policy as well. So it's a win-win.
Perfect. Do you have, it's interesting, I've talked to some people and they've said that they get no shortage of unsolicited interest in their time, and it becomes a bit of a harassment thing. And sometimes they will eventually take that meeting, but the whole foundation of that interaction, knowing that they've been harassing you and they've, you know, that now they finally get their half hour, but the vibe is, they're already a little bit predisposed because they've been a bit harassed. And the thinking is here that if you're coming in and your first impression of somebody is that they're not harassing you at all, they just are happy to come in and make a donation to your charity of choice, that whole initial vibe should be much better.
It is. It's not a defensive situation too, because also you tend to find when people are doing that kind of hard push trying to get the meeting, when they do eventually get to talk to you, they feel that the time's very limited, we've got to get this across quickly. They're used to people hanging up on them or not being respectful of their time. Whereas if they know that they have a period, an hour or half an hour, or however long it is, to talk and for the person to listen and give advice, that creates a different vibe too. Because I think part of the other dynamic is it's not just a chance to pitch at, but it's a chance to get someone's expertise back. And because in effect they're paying for that, there is this feeling of it's a two-way conversation. So for example, if someone phones me up and just wants to talk about pitching an OMS system, and I don't want an OMS system at the moment, there's no real point. Whereas if it's a case of they're wanting my opinion on what a good OMS system would do, maybe where there's gaps, maybe how they could pitch better, maybe the things that are important, what it's like on the other side, that's a different conversation. And it's more of a two-way conversation rather than, here, I'm going to pitch at you. So I think for a service provider, it's a slightly different concept. Rather than just being able to pitch and just paying to pitch, it's actually to get input and almost kind of consulting advice on how their product looks and how, you know, it could look better to someone. So even if I'm not looking for an OMS at the moment, I'd be happy to talk to someone about maybe facets of their product which could be better or what they might be missing, or and that's probably of more value as well, I'd say.
Is there, how about the whole concept of just expanding your own knowledge and understanding the USPs of different OMS and just you're getting your own better understanding? Because to your point, you're not naturally going to take an OMS meeting, but if you were to take that OMS vendor meeting, because they're happy to make a donation to your charity of choice, you could actually end up learning something.
Oh, agreed, 100%. Because, you know, the reality is in the COO role, part of your job is to keep on top of what's happening. The last thing you want to find is to go through a due diligence process and be told, well, actually, you're behind the curve. Other systems do this. There's, you know, some regulatory reporting or there's other risk reporting that you can do. So it is important for us to keep up to date with all different product offerings, different price points, new technology. That's absolutely key as well. So the education point, definitely, but it's hard sometimes to take the call when it's pushed very hard. You feel like, I don't have time to look at it now. You almost feel you want to de-stress that situation and look at it in your own terms and just get the key information. So again, you wouldn't want to talk to, say, 5 OMS providers very quickly because it's very hard in that time period to really differentiate what, you know, the different pitches mean and those different kind of points. Whereas to have a more in-depth conversation with 1 or 2 can actually be more valuable.
Interesting. And I one of the value propositions, as I see it from coming from the vendor side myself, is just the time compression, right? Because I could potentially be 5 touches and 6 months away from that meeting, right? To me, as a vendor, to be able to compress that time frame and get an hour face to face, which obviously is way better than a half-hour Zoom call, which is probably most of what you do. So to compress that time frame is very valuable as a vendor. It's also, I think vendors don't necessarily expect to sell you in that first meeting. They just want to establish a relationship. They want to be on your radar when your contract is up, or just to be on your radar because people come to you for expertise and you are now aware of it. It's not necessarily to think, I'm going to put you in my pipeline straight away. You have to start somewhere.
You do, and I think part of the challenge can be is that when a salesperson is on the other side and they're basically just given a list of, okay, hit 300 people, get some meetings, it's very hard because they might not even actually be incentivized to look further on in terms of the actual end relationship. They're thinking, first of all, I just need to get some calls, and then we'll work through that. Whereas this fast tracks that in terms of this isn't just getting the call. This is actually getting an hour of time to actually probably meet up, go through things in a bit more detail. And it's a collaborative meeting. It's a two-way meeting. It's not just a pure pitch, if you want it to be. I mean, of course, if someone wants to go in and just pitch for an hour, that's fair enough, but they're probably not going to get so much out of the meeting.
Right.
So from my perspective, it enables a kind of a higher quality meeting rather than just getting something in the diary to say, look, I've achieved this. I've got 5 meetings this week. It's actually get some quality information. And you're right. It did things like, you know, the lockup in your existing contracts when it rolls, if you're actually interested in making a change, if you like your system, things that system does well that others might not do. And things like that, where you can see a hell of a lot more value than just a pure pitch call, where you're always kind of scared of, okay, I've got this call. At some point, they're going to say, oh, sorry, I need to go. And, you know, when you're pitching and you're thinking, I need to make sure that I get this kind of these 5 important points through and these differentiators, which is impossible in a one-off meeting.
Right. And so coming from the vendor side, right, it's not always about an immediate opportunity, but it's also about establishing a relationship, right?
Definitely.
I would think that when someone meets you and is telling you their story, there's an interpersonal bond and you'll remember this meeting. Right? It's a unique meeting, and I think that you would want that value of the relationship. Maybe they leave and go to another job. Maybe you go to another job, but that relationship is forever because it's memorable.
Exactly, and I think the reality is it's a small industry. In reality, you know, there's a finite number of service providers, a finite number of people in the kind of COO and the operations roles too. So it's a case of, you know, those relationships. The amount of people I know in this industry who I've known for 10, 15 years, they've been at 3 or 4 different shops. I've been at lots of different shops. I've been on a consultant at some points. I've been a COO at other points. The reality is, you know, you build these relationships and it's the people that you kind of go to first before you look at the product. So I'd say, yes, in terms of building those relationships, I think that's very, very important, especially in an industry like hedge funds where, you know, you look at all these different hedge funds, we're not actually in competition with each other in the way that kind of Pepsi and Coke are in competition. We're all trying to create slightly different flavors. And if we do our job well, that's what investors want. They don't say, oh, we'll look at those guys or those guys. It's a case of what risk are you giving me that fits in my portfolio? You know, we could take both of you if you fit in. So I think in those cases, as COOs, we do talk to each other. We have our networks. We try and share information. So again, from a service provider perspective, it is important not to kind of to burn your own you know, relationships with people.
Right.
And I remember when I was, you know, first on the service provider side, cold calling people and hating it. And, you know, the amount of people where I just get a note, not interested, meet the same person at a conference a few weeks later. And yeah, they were interested and, oh, that sounds a great proposition. But I realized because of the approach, they wouldn't really engage because they were initially just kind of, oh, I just don't have time. Personally, I mean, I have, on average, about 200 unsolicited emails a day. I have up to, you know, 20 or 30 unsolicited calls on both my work number and my mobile, which means I very, very rarely respond to those or pick up the phone because I just don't have time. Right. You know, I don't have the focus or the time to do that.
Right. And that was a big reason why we built this, to be able to facilitate those connections that are serious, right? Because if somebody's going to reach into their pocket and they're going to make a donation to your charity of choice, then they obviously have done their research and there is value in that meeting to them. and you might even learn something. So theoretically, everybody wins.
Agreed, and I think it's the infrastructure is important too, and that's in place in terms of the ability to. It's kind of both people choose to make the meeting, so it doesn't feel as unsolicited.
Perfect. Can we talk about the expert network? Because you were gracious enough to do another interview, which we have in print on the website. But if you could just talk about that a bit more, because I always thought that that's an interesting model. And if we could disintermediate the expert networks where people are willing to offer their time in return for a charitable donation versus lining their pockets, that this is a good venue for them to take those meetings. And as we've discussed before, there are no shortage of drawbacks to the expert network model, and I just wanted to see if you could comment on that again, please.
No, definitely. I mean, it's interesting. There is a time and a place for expert networks, but what I found interesting is in this role, the amount of times I'd have expert networks contact me to act as an expert, and normally it is talking about kind of technical systems or infrastructure with service providers. And it was always a challenge to be able to do that because of the conflicts of interest in terms of when you're regulated and you're making decisions on these providers, you can't then take money. And just to take a step back, how the expert networks work is basically they will have a client that comes in with a need, say to talk to COOs or to talk to some kind of other vendor, or it can be anything, but just to get an opinion. They will go and kind of source people and put in front of them. They will choose who they want to talk to, and then they basically set up a call, which, I mean, normally people get paid a certain amount and then they charge an element more for arranging that. And there are new models, which, we've talked about previously in terms of where those calls are then transcribed and made available to others, etc. But the core thing is for someone who sits at a regulated manager, the conflicts of interest are material. And also for being paid, it just looks, it kind of goes against quite a few of the FCA kind of main feelings of fairness, and so it's a very difficult one to kind of square away. Whereas if it's a case of you're doing it for a charitable contribution, so there is no conflict of interest. I'm not going to feel, I have to choose that service provider because he's paid me to see him or her. That's a material thing. It means that there's no conflicts on tax as well, and just structuring, and that there's a lot of complications when you're getting paid. On the FCA, for example, you'd have to put it on your conflicts of interest register. It would have to be, registered on there. You'd have to keep track of them. It can just get very messy. And if the regulator ever did come in and have a look at that and say, well, how do you kind of justify this? How are you still fully not conflicted? Does this kind of look almost like anti-bribery, or so in effect, having something like this where it just allows to focus the providers, have a two-way choice for that meeting, but they're serious. And from our CSR perspective, it means a charitable contribution is going to the charity of our choice. That feels like a good use of time.
Right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that being able to put yourself out there directly, let people make their own decision versus having a broker effectively in the middle, and also a broker that's probably sending you a lot of stuff that is not even relevant to what your expertise is, right?
I'd agree, because again, their job isn't to really understand the kind of the nuance of it. They're just looking for someone who, from a 10,000 feet view, looks like they could be of interest, because what they want to do is put together here's a list of 20 potential people. Now you choose who you want us to actually execute with. So it's kind of a very much like a dating kind of mechanism. Whereas this way, it feels more like a two-way portal. And I think because the industry is smaller, it makes it more kind of focused, more nuanced, so people can understand pretty quickly what people are willing to talk about, what they're knowledgeable on as well. I think it suits an industry like ours very, very nicely as a kind of a good starting point to try the model.
I think a big part of the value proposition, as far as we see it, is that when you do create an offer, which again you've done, and we greatly appreciate your participation, but when you create an offer, you can also indicate the types of things you're willing to talk about, right? There is a possibility that you just want to offer your expertise and not be willing to take a pitch, or maybe there's a certain price point that you're willing to offer mentoring or guidance at a much lower price point versus another offer that you could create where you're willing to just really meet almost anybody as long as they're willing to make a donation. So I think that the ability for you to control the narrative, let people know what you're interested in, let people know what you're willing to talk about, let people know what your expertise is. I think that open dialogue, if nothing else through your offer, should create a lot of efficiencies as well.
No, agreed. It gives a large amount of flexibility. And I think the reality is most people do want to share their expertise and help. I think that's a natural kind of thing. And this just allows it to become a lot more focused. And I think the charitable contribution is important as well, because I think, for a lot of people, that's, a very important thing too. We want to kind of, give help. It just kind of puts the two jigsaw pieces together in a very, very kind of neat way.
Excellent. Another question is around compliance. You mentioned that before in the expert network model. Many people, when they sign up as a time giver, they're doing it as themselves, right? Because you're not just an employee of Monterone Partner. You have a broad, a long history and knowledge about many different things. From a compliance perspective, do you see any concerns as the COO of a hedge fund, number one, that maybe goes away as a result of doing this? Or do you think that doing it as an individual makes a difference relative to doing it as the COO of a hedge fund?
I'd say the important thing in terms of compliance with this and all kind of models and all conversations is, there's never the intention or the obligation to breach any of your compliance obligations or any confidentiality. Just because someone's paying for a conversation doesn't mean that they have the right to ask all questions.
Yes.
It has to be done in a very kind of controlled way in terms of our regulatory obligations. So I would say there isn't really too much difference. I think the challenge with the expert network model with compliance is always about this fear about material non-public information, about saying something that isn't in the public domain. That's more in terms of when you're looking at investments. Whereas in this way, we're not really looking at that at all. It is really kind of advising advice to people who are pitching products. It's not something that's going to affect anybody's share price. It's a sharing of knowledge rather than information per se, which I think is the main difference how I view it. But the reality is everybody signs disclaimers, they understand their regulatory obligations, and it's a different kind of model than the whole thing that someone's paying you for specific information that isn't in the public domain, which is I think where expert networks maybe got a bad rep when their models were kind of maybe earlier than they are now. Whereas now, if you ever talk to an expert network, a lot of the focus is on compliance, right, and the fact that the calls may be recorded and monitored, and trainings given to the people who you're speaking to make sure that they don't give you any kind of non-public information. Because, when we use an expert network, that would be our worst case scenario, right, because then you can't trade.
And do you see within this organization, obviously you're the COO, and many people want to talk to you because you hold budget, and that's not an unimportant factor. And you also have expertise. Are there other roles within the hedge fund that you would see any issues with? Your PMs, for example, do you think there would be any issues from a compliance perspective from your PMs or any other employees, or do you think it's universally acceptable?
I think it's universally acceptable. As long as it depends where the questions are going. For example, you wouldn't talk to a portfolio manager about what's in his portfolio or anything that hasn't been disclosed. And I think that's, as long as people understand that you're not paying to get access to anything that is kind of not available or you can talk about to anybody.
Yes.
It's really about the time access rather than getting any particular information. For example, if I had all the time in the world, I'd love to speak to every service provider who wants to talk to me and give them advice and help, because I know it would help them. But I have limited time. So it's not about getting anything that I wouldn't talk to anybody about and tell them. It's getting the time to do that.
Right. I think a big part of the Time to Give network that make sure that those meetings are not only impactful, but appropriate is that when you accept an indication of interest of somebody who wants to have a meeting with you, and you look at their bio and you look at the note that they send you and you agree to meet with them, they then get your information and you get their information, and they can set an agenda and they can ask questions. So it allows you a window to ensure that there won't be inappropriate questions, that you can make sure that you understand what you're going to be talking about and set expectations on both sides, so that these types of instances these problems don't arise.
Agreed. And I think that's a good kind of feature for both sides, because no one wants to kind of get off on the wrong foot or have go away from the meeting and feel, oh, we screwed that up. They kind of left upset, or they felt that they were kind of, flummoxed by a question. I think it allows kind of a more open dialogue, because it allows people to prepare as well.
Yes.
In terms of if there's questions about a particular facet, they can go away and do a bit of pre-reading, or, it's no one's kind of wasting their time, which is, I think, the main kind of, benefit of this structure.
Right. And I don't know, do people often, when you meet with them, come with an agenda or offer an agenda, or is that not a common thing?
Not a common thing. I mean, normally if people are coming in to say pitch, they have their own spiel. They know what they want to get across. They have their kind of fixed points that they might want to Resign view this. I mean, people could view it as an opportunity to try and pitch in a more focused way because they've, shown intention. But I see the best value as someone who actually wants to learn something and get the two-way conversation and just get what it looks like from the other side. It's almost like consulting, and the best people to consult and give you input are the people you're trying to sell to. So I'd say that the best value I can see for a service provider is not to just get access to pitch to this guy we've been trying to, but actually have a two-way conversation and maybe learn some things and help in terms of how they come across to the community as a whole.
Which is then going to put them in better standing, because again, the goal here is to create a connection that could last throughout both of your careers. And if it's starts off on the right foot, then you have a much higher likelihood. So as a professional salesperson, you've been on the other side as well. You know that you're not turning up with a PowerPoint deck typically. You just want to establish a foundation. You want to understand pain points. You want to understand where you could add value. And my belief is that everybody understands that now, and that is going to be the foundation for the meeting and hopefully a launch pad for something in the future, unless there is something identified in the near term where they can help you, or maybe you identify a pain point and they know somebody else who can help you and add value in that way.
Exactly, because the reality is this industry is all about connections, and we're all small firms. We're all facing the same issues at the same time. So the amount of times you do want to talk to someone and get a view. So for example, I can imagine, say a new regulatory issue is coming along, your service provider doesn't handle it. Oh, I spoke to, so I'll give them a call. And so it is all about kind of getting those relationships going, those kind of communication portals and points. That's very, very important. But of course, the best thing for the network is, of course, for those further on calls to also go through the network.
Perfect. Thank you, Phil.
That's cool.
Great. We crushed it.